It always starts with the little things you overlook, the silent routines, the automatic I love us, the quiet dinners after long days. That was our life. My name is Frank Patterson. I'm 47 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I had the kind of marriage most people envied. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, one of those places where the dogs bark at 5. The mailman knows your name, and the summers always smelled like fresh cut grass and barbecue smoke. My wife, Susan, and I had been together for over 10 years. 2 beautiful daughters, a house we built from scratch, not just with money, but with memories, late nights, painting walls, hanging curtains, laughing at nothing. We didn't fight. That's what everyone always says. But with us, it was true. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors. Susan had a habit of overreacting to little things, a spilled drink, a forgotten chore, but nothing ever escalated. We had disagreements, sure, but they blew over like summer rain. Most of our friends called us the stable ones. I was the provider, a manager at a manufacturing plant, clocking in early, clocking out late, making sure my family never lacked anything. Susan stayed home with the girls. That was our deal. She always said she wanted to be present for every school play, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. And I respected that. Looking back now, maybe we got too comfortable. Maybe I mistook the absence of conflict for the presence of happiness. We had fallen into rhythm. Birthdays, PTA meetings, Sunday church, summer road trips to the mountains. On paper, it looked perfect. But something was off, and I didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to. The warning signs were subtle. Susan started dressing differently, putting more effort into her appearance for seemingly mundane errands. She'd disappear into the bedroom for long periods, texting with a little smirk she thought I didn't notice. I chalked it up to boredom, the kind that sneaks into a marriage after a decade when routine becomes the norm and novelty is a memory. Still, I trusted her. I never checked her phone, never questioned her late-night walks to clear her head. When people talk about love, they never mention how easy it is to believe in someone when you've built a life together, and how devastating it is when you realize you believed in a lie. I remember the night it all started to crack. We were sitting in the living room. The girls were upstairs, and Susan turned to me, not angry, not emotional, just distant. "I'm not happy anymore," she said. Just like that. No preamble, no fight, no reason. Just a flat statement that hit like a freight train. "What do you even say to that?" I asked if she wanted to talk about it. She shook her head, said she didn't know what she wanted. And 2 days later, she told me I should move out for the sake of the kids, to give her space to think. And I did. Like a fool, I packed my things and left my daughters behind because I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed she needed time to breathe, to figure herself out, and that somehow we'd fix it. Because that's what marriages do, right? They bend. They don't break. But some fractures don't heal, especially when someone's already moved on before you even knew there was a goodbye. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have guessed, was that this wasn't about space. It wasn't about thinking. It was about someone else. And that's where the real story begins. It started like most stories do, not with chaos, not with heartbreak, but with peace. A quiet kind of peace that settles into your bones and makes you believe, maybe foolishly, that life has dealt you a kind hand. My name is Frank Whitaker. I'm 52 years old now, but this story begins over a decade ago, in a small town just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of town where people wave from their porches, and the biggest traffic jam you'll ever hit is at the church parking lot after Sunday service. When I met Diane, she was 27, full of life and laughter. She had this way of lighting up a room without even trying. I was 31 then, working long hours as a field supervisor for an energy company. Solid job, nothing flashy, but it paid well, and I took pride in being dependable. Diane worked part-time at a florist's shop when we first met. Always came home with a bit of pollen in her hair, and the smell of roses clinging to her clothes. We fell into love the way people used to, slowly, intentionally, with dinner, dates that ended in deep talks, and weekend road trips through winding country highways. Within a year, we were married in a modest ceremony at the First Baptist Church on Main Street. Nothing fancy, just family, close friends, and the pastor we both grew up listening to. Life after the wedding wasn't glamorous, but it was good. Really good. We bought a 3-bedroom house on the edge of town, white siding. A red porch swing, big enough for the family we planned to build. And we did. 2 beautiful kids, both girls, With Diane's smile and my stubbornness, I worked. She stayed home. It was our agreement, one we both felt good about. I brought in the paycheck, and she ran the household with grace and grit. Lunches packed, clothes folded, homework checked. She was, to most people, the picture of a devoted wife and mother. And I'll say this plainly. I loved my life. It wasn't perfect, what life is, but it was full. We had our routines. Coffee in the morning while the girls were still asleep. Friday movie nights with popcorn and blankets. Church on Sundays followed by pot roast and sweet tea. There were no screaming matches, no broken plates or late-night accusations. In 10 years of marriage, Diane and I had maybe 3 real arguments, and none of them lasted longer than an hour. She did have a tendency to overreact. Small things, a bill paid late, the kids spilling juice on the carpet, they could set her off more than you'd expect. But I chalked it up to stress, or maybe just the burden of being a full-time mom. I never took it personally. I figured every couple had their quirks, and if that was our biggest issue, we were doing just fine. Friends used to say we made marriage look easy, and honestly, it felt that way. There was a rhythm to our life. School drop-offs, softball, games, birthdays, family dinners with her parents every other Sunday. I never suspected a thing. Not once. Because why would I? I had blind faith in the idea that love, once rooted, stayed rooted. I thought that if you showed up every day, worked hard, stayed loyal, put your family first, that counted for something, that it was enough. But comfort can be dangerous. It numbs you. It lets you look away when things begin to shift. You miss the details. Like when she started staying on her phone longer after the kids were in bed, or how she'd suddenly want to go for a drive just to get some space. I told myself it was normal. Everyone needs breathing room. And Diane had always been independent. Still, somewhere inside, a small voice had started to whisper. But I buried it. Because confronting that voice would mean questioning everything. Our life, our love, our past 10 years. So I stayed quiet, and I stayed blind. And it's funny, not in a humorous way, but in that cruel, ironic way life tends to unfold. How quickly the ground can disappear beneath your feet. One moment, you're making dinner while your kids argue over what show to watch. The next, your wife of 10 years tells you she's not happy anymore. There was no yelling, no warning, just that sentence. And with it, the end of everything I thought I knew. But that's getting ahead of things. Because before the crash, there was this life, the one we built together, that felt unshakable. And the real tragedy, I didn't know I was living in the final days of it until it was already over. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you've ever gone through something like this, leave a comment below. We read every word. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that speak to the heart. It was a Thursday evening, early spring in Oklahoma, when the wind still carries a bit of winter in its breath. I had just gotten home from work, boots still dusty from the sight, shoulders aching from another 10-hour shift. Diane was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The girls upstairs arguing over a stuffed animal. Just another normal evening. Or so I thought. She didn't look up when I came in. Didn't say hey hun, or ask how my day was. Just kept stirring. I hung my keys on the hook, kissed her on the cheek, and said something about how tired I was. She nodded. That kind of nod where you can tell someone isn't really listening. I chalked it up to a bad day. Maybe she was worn out. It happens. We've all been there. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The kids, unaware of anything, were chattering away about a school project. Diane barely touched her food. She kept glancing toward the window, like something was waiting out there for her. I didn't press it. I never liked poking the bear when something seemed off. Figured she'd talk when she was ready. That was our way. But that night, after the girls went to bed, she sat me down in the living room. Her eyes were dry, her voice steady, like she'd practiced this in her head 100 times before saying it out loud. I'm not happy, Frank, she said. I haven't been for a while. I just sat there, not moving, not breathing. You know how, when someone dies in the movies, time slows down and the sound fades. That's exactly how it felt. My ears were ringing, and her voice suddenly seemed like it was coming from underwater. I asked if she wanted to talk about it, to explain, to try counseling, anything. She shook her head. I need time. Space. I think it'd be better if you moved out for a while. That was the moment my whole life cracked in half. And the crazy part, I agreed. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't demand answers. I was so blindsided, so confused. I just nodded and said, "If that's what you want." I left the next afternoon with a single suitcase and my work boots. My brother had a little apartment above his garage, across town. Nothing fancy, but it was quiet and gave me somewhere to land. I remember walking through our front door that last time, watching my girls play on the rug in the living room. They looked up at me, smiling. I said I was going away for a little while, for work. I didn't have the heart to tell them the truth. Hell, I didn't even know what the truth was at that point. The first few days were a fog. I kept expecting my phone to ring, expecting her to say she'd made a mistake, that it was just stress, or hormones, or cabin fever. But she didn't call. Not once. I called to talk to the girls, but Diane kept the conversations short, polite, but distant. Like I was a stranger. By the third week, I started piecing it together. The way she rushed the whole separation. The way she didn't even hesitate when one suggested splitting custody. That was the first red flag. Diane loved those girls more than anything. She used to cry when they got a cold. But now, she was agreeing to part-time parenting, like she was signing up for a weekend class. It didn't make sense. And then came the phone call. "I need to tell you something, before you hear it from someone else," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I've started seeing someone." I didn't respond. Just sat there on the other end of the line, staring at the wall. She added, "It's recent. Just the last week or so." But I knew she was lying. You don't leave your husband, ask him to move out, and fall into someone else's arms, all in a few days. That seed had been planted long before I packed that suitcase. I asked who he was. She hesitated, then muttered his name. Said he was younger, 25, maybe 26. Worked odd jobs. Lived with his aunt. That's when it all clicked. The long walks. The late-night drives. The sudden changes in her appearance. I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been blind. And now, here she was, already with someone else while our marriage was still warm. The betrayal didn't feel like rage at first, it felt like weight. Heavy, suffocating weight that settled on my chest and made it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about another man. It was about the lie I had been living. The love I thought was real. The life I thought we were building together. In that moment, I realized Diane hadn't just walked away from me. She had walked away from everything we'd built. Our family, our home, our history. And worst of all, from the man who had loved her without hesitation. But if I thought that was rock bottom, I was wrong. Because what came next, what she did with this new man, and how she treated me and our daughters in the weeks that followed, would show me just how far someone can fall when they convince themselves that the grass is greener. And so I braced myself because the storm was only just beginning. 3 weeks, that's all it took for everything I thought I knew to come undone. When Diane first told me she wasn't happy anymore, it was like someone knocked the wind out of me. But I still held on to hope. I thought maybe it was a phase. That, after a little time apart, she'd come to her senses. Maybe she was just overwhelmed, tired of the routine. I told myself we just needed a reset. Some couples did that, right? Took space, found their way back. I clung to that idea, like a man holding a rope over open water. But denial doesn't protect you from the truth. It just delays the damage. It was a Sunday afternoon when the phone rang. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in my brother's guest room, folding laundry, trying to keep busy. Diane's name popped up, and for a second, my heart skipped. Thought maybe she wanted to talk, maybe she missed me. But the moment I answered, I knew something was off. Her voice was quiet, flat, like she was reading from a script. She didn't waste time. "I wanted to tell you something before someone else does." That one sentence, and I knew. I didn't even need her to say it. Still, I sat there, numb, holding the phone like it was made of glass. "I've been seeing someone," she said. "It's new, just started last week." There was a silence between us that felt like it could have swallowed the whole town. I didn't say anything for a long while. I was trying to decide whether to scream or laugh, or maybe both. She called it new, but I knew better. Number one falls into someone's arms that fast, unless they'd been leaning toward them for a while. She didn't just stumble into this man. She planned it, maybe not out loud, maybe not consciously, but she made space for him in her mind long before she asked me to leave. I asked who he was. She hesitated, that kind of hesitation that's more damning than a lie. Eventually, she told me his name. I didn't recognize it. Said he was 25, worked construction when he could, and was living with his aunt after getting laid off. I sat there, staring at the wall. And all I could think was, this is who she left me for. Not that it would have hurt less if he was some successful executive or a retired Marine, but something about the fact that this guy, a boy really, couldn't even support himself. It hit different. I had spent 10 years breaking my back to build a life with Diane, and she walked away from all of it for someone who hadn't even figured his life out yet. She said it wasn't serious. It's just someone I'm talking to. But every word out of her mouth sounded like damage control. She was already in too deep and trying to soften the blow. What she didn't realize was, the damage had already been done. I thought back on the last few months, the late nights, the cold shoulder, the distant look in her eyes, when we sat in the same room, but felt 100 miles apart. It wasn't my imagination. It had been happening, slowly, quietly. She'd been slipping away, brick by brick, until all that was left of our marriage was the shell. I remember standing up, walking to the window, and watching the trees sway in the wind outside. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Diane kept talking about how she didn't mean to hurt me, how she just wanted to feel alive again, how she thought she was doing what was best for herself. And all I could think was, how do you wreck your whole family and call it self-care? The betrayal wasn't just in the cheating. It was in the way she'd erased me from her life without a backward glance. Like 10 years didn't count. Like the holidays, the birthdays, the nights pacing the floor with sick babies in our arms. All of it meant nothing now that she had a shiny new fantasy. And maybe that's the word that stuck with me the most. Fantasy. Because that's what this was. She was chasing a dream that didn't exist. A version of herself that didn't have responsibilities. Didn't have history. Didn't have stretch marks or sleepless nights. And this new guy, this 25-year-old without a job, without a mortgage, without any skin in the game, he represented that fantasy. But the truth, fantasies fade. Reality always comes knocking. And when it does, it doesn't care how good someone made you feel for a few weeks. It only cares what's left standing when the thrill wears off. As the call ended, Diane said something that still rattles around in my head. I hope we can still be friends, for the girl's sake. Friends. She dropped that word like it was reasonable, like it made sense for me to go from husband to co-parent to best buddy while she played house with someone else in the home I paid for. Like I was supposed to high-five her for her personal growth. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just said, take care of yourself. And hung up. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and realized something that changed everything. The woman I married was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for a long time, and I just didn't want to see it. And as painful as it was, and it was painful, I also knew this. I was done being the only one fighting for a marriage that no longer existed. But I wasn't done fighting. Not for myself. Not for my daughters. Not for the life I still had left to live. Because while Diane was chasing a boy who lived with his aunt, I was about to reclaim everything I had given up trying to keep her happy. And that was a battle I intended to win. After Diane's confession, you'd think the dust would have settled, that we'd both go our separate ways, and let the lawyers handle the slow disassembly of a 10-year marriage. But what came next caught me off guard, more than her affair ever could. She wanted the divorce finalized. Fast. No mediation, no arguments, no drawn-out battles over custody or property. Just signatures and silence. At first, I was relieved. I'd heard the horror stories men dragged through court for years, drained emotionally and financially, just trying to get free. But here Diane was eager to hand me a clean break. She called me the day after her confession, said she'd spoken to a lawyer and that she was willing to agree to anything. Her words, not mine. I asked her again, point blank, "You're okay with splitting custody of the girls? 50-50? She didn't even pause. "Yeah, that's fine." And that was the first moment I knew something didn't add up. See, Diane had always been a fiercely protective mother. I remember the time our youngest caught a fever, and Diane didn't sleep for 2 days straight, taking her temperature every hour on the hour. She cried, dropping them off on their first day of kindergarten. Missed one of our anniversaries because she didn't want to leave them with a sitter. This was a woman who lived and breathed for those kids. And now, she was casually agreeing to have them half the time. No fight, no guilt, no emotion. It didn't make sense, unless she wasn't making the decisions on her own anymore. I started wondering who was really behind the urgency. This 25-year-old guy she was seeing. Maybe he didn't want to be just the side story. Maybe he was pressuring her to speed things up, to tear it all down so they could move in, play house, and pretend none of it had ever happened. That kind of thing's easy to imagine when you're young and dumb and haven't built anything yourself. There's a term for it, a fair fog. When people get so swept up in the thrill, the novelty, the illusion, that they lose all perspective. It's like a drug. Everything real becomes blurry. Everything reckless feels justified. And that's exactly where Diane was. Her behavior became erratic. She called me at odd hours, talked fast, made promises she didn't remember the next day. One night she'd say we were better off apart. The next she'd act like we could be great friends and raise the girls as a team. It was like talking to two different people in the same body. And all the while, she was in a rush, pushing paperwork, texting about court dates, saying things like, the sooner we get through this, the better it'll be for everyone. But everyone knew the truth. Better for him, not us. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to beat the clock. Like she was afraid that if she didn't lock everything in fast, she might lose her grip on him. Maybe he was threatening to walk if she didn't cut ties with her old life. Maybe she thought being single on paper would make it feel less like cheating. Or maybe she just wanted to prove to everyone, especially her family, who by now had started to ask some hard questions, that this wasn't just a fling. But no matter how you dressed it up, it reeked of desperation. The speed, the passivity, the lack of interest in the very things she used to protect with her life. They all pointed to one thing. Diane wasn't thinking clearly. She was running headfirst into a fantasy, hoping it would cushion the fall. Meanwhile, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, holding all the cards. I wasn't angry. Not the way people expected. I was calm, clear, cautious, because I knew this wouldn't last. Whatever spell she was under, whatever hold this boy had over her, it was temporary, and once it wore off, reality would come crashing back like a freight train. She'd look around and realize what she gave up. The stability, the history, the home we built together, the man who loved her even when she didn't love herself. And when that day came, I didn't want to be caught in the wreckage, so I played along. Quietly, carefully. I let her think she was in control. I signed the papers she sent. I kept my tone measured and kind. I agreed to shared custody, because it was best for the girls, and because it would protect me from future battles. I made copies of everything, documented every exchange. And above all, I kept my distance. Because I wasn't just trying to end a marriage, I was trying to survive the storm she hadn't even realized she'd started. But storms pass. They always do. And while she chased rainbows with someone who couldn't hold a job or pay rent without a relative's help, I was quietly building something stronger, not with her, but within myself. And soon enough, the cracks in her fantasy life would start to show. But by then, I'd already be standing on solid ground. That's when things began to shift. Not for her, but for me. For the first time in months, I stopped reacting and started preparing. Because if Diane wanted a fast divorce, then I was going to give her one, on my terms. And that's exactly what I did. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of limbo. Not quite married, not quite divorced, but unmistakably broken. On paper, Diane and I were in the process of legally parting ways. But in reality, our lives were still tangled in ways neither of us could avoid. There were custody exchanges, paperwork, decisions about who'd keep what, all the practical pieces of a family being quietly dismantled. But underneath all of that, there were signs, things that didn't make sense. And the more I saw, the more I realized just how deeply the trust had shattered. Not just because of the affair, but because of the way she began to behave after. It started small. I noticed Diane acting strangely. During our handoffs with the girls, she'd linger longer than necessary, stand too close, brush against my arm when handing me a backpack. At first, I thought I was imagining it, reading too much into body language. But it kept happening. One afternoon, when I pulled into the driveway to pick up the girls, she followed me outside, barefoot, wearing a hoodie that wasn't hers. Her eyes were glassy, voice soft, like she was teetering on the edge of saying something, but couldn't quite find the words. I got the girls in the truck, gave each of them a kiss, and went to close the door. Then Diane leaned in, put one hand on my shoulder and the other on the open doorframe, and whispered, "Can I get a hug?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something behind her eyes that caught me off guard. Not guilt, not remorse, but confusion. She looked lost, like someone waking up from a dream and not sure where they were. I stepped back, gently, pushed her hand away, and said, "No, Diane, not anymore." Her face fell. For a second, I saw the mask slip. She looked stunned, like it never occurred to her that I might say no. That moment told me everything. She wanted to keep me close, not because she loved me, but because she needed the comfort of what I represented: stability, history, safety. I was plan B. The net below the high wire act. She was walking with a man who, from the looks of it, couldn't even hold down a job at the local feed store. And once I refused that hug, the energy between us shifted. She started getting colder, sharper, passive-aggressive texts, questions about money, complaints about the girls. She'd try to provoke me, fish for emotional reactions, test whether I still cared, or whether I was really letting go. But the answer was simple. I was done. Trust doesn't just snap in one clean break. It cracks over time, like a windshield, spidering from a single point of impact. Her affair might have been the blow, but her behavior afterward, the games, the manipulation, the gaslighting, that's what shattered it. She started claiming she didn't really do anything wrong, that they hadn't even slept together yet. When I moved out, as if the technicality of it all erased the betrayal, she said things like, "You can't get me on adultery," as if we were in some kind of legal chess match, instead of a marriage that she had gutted from the inside out. But what cut the deepest wasn't the lies. It was the way she began to justify them. She'd say she deserved to be happy, that I hadn't been attentive enough, that I was always busy with work. And maybe that was true. Maybe I had been tired, distracted, focused on providing instead of connecting. But I never gave up on her. Never stepped outside our vows. Never thought of love as something disposable. She did. One night, after I dropped the kids off, she called me just to argue, said the girls were asking questions about my new girlfriend, a woman who didn't exist, and accused me of bringing strangers around them. I hadn't brought anyone around. I barely left the house unless it was for work or groceries. But the accusation wasn't about truth. It was about control. About keeping me off balance. That's when it hit me. She was scared, not of losing me, but of losing the power she had over me for years. When someone knows they've wronged you, but they see you moving on anyway, that's terrifying for them, because it means they no longer get to write your story. So I stopped engaging. I kept conversations short, polite, businesslike. I didn't respond to provocation. I didn't defend myself. I let her twist in her own silence. And the more I pulled away, the more frantic she became. She started dropping hints that things weren't going so well with the new guy, that he was different than she expected, that he wasn't great with the kids. The sparkle she had in her eyes when she first mentioned him, gone, replaced by frustration, maybe even regret. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just listened, nodded, hung up the phone, because something had changed in me too. I wasn't chasing closure. I wasn't waiting for her to apologize. I was past that. The trust was gone, and in its place was a kind of quiet resolve. I'd built my life around her once. That wouldn't happen again. And as the cracks in her fantasy life widened, I could see the collapse coming. But by then, I'd already started laying the foundation for something new, something real. Because when trust is broken, love isn't the first thing to die. It's respect. And once that's gone, there's no turning back. At first, he was just a name, barely more than a shadow, mentioned in a hushed voice over a phone call Diane didn't want to make. "Jason," she said, as if that explained everything. She told me he was 25, worked odd jobs here and there, and stayed with his aunt on the south side of Broken Arrow. I pictured someone young, aimless, probably all charm and no compass. But I didn't care. Not at first. See, when someone walks out on a decade-long marriage for someone else, you assume they've found something better, smarter, stronger, more capable. It's a bitter pill, but you tell yourself, well, maybe I was never enough. That was the lie I almost swallowed. But the truth, Jason wasn't better. He wasn't even equal. Word travels fast in small towns. And by the second month of our separation, I knew more about him than I ever wanted to. A friend of mine who worked at a car lot said Jason used to stop by looking for a buy here, pay here special, but never had enough cash for a down payment. Another buddy from church said he'd seen him hanging around a convenience store parking lot late at night with a different girl last summer. And then there was the bombshell. Turns out Jason had a history of couch surfing, couldn't hold a job longer than 3 months, and had been kicked out of his last girlfriend's place for borrowing her rent money. This was the man Diane left her family for. And reality, it didn't take long to catch up to her. At first, she was glowing. You could hear it in her voice when she called to check in or coordinate kid pickups. That fake, cheerful tone, like everything was wonderful. I let her play her game. But over time, the cracks started to show. She began asking for more favors, Could I keep the girls an extra night? Could I drop off groceries? Could I help her pay the dentist bill she forgot about? I started piecing it together. Jason wasn't helping. He wasn't stepping up. Hell, half the time, he wasn't even there. One Saturday morning, I pulled into a driveway to pick up the kids. Jason's beat-up Chevy truck was parked in my old spot, the one I used to back into after long days, just so I could carry the girls in half asleep from the car. I sat there for a moment, staring at it. The nerve, the disrespect. But I kept my face still, said nothing when Diane came out, and just greeted my daughters like always. What struck me most that day wasn't the truck, or even him. It was Diane. She looked tired, worn thin. Her hair, once carefully done, was up in a messy bun. She had bags under her eyes. Her voice was clipped. She avoided eye contact. The sparkle was gone. Fantasy has a shelf life, and hers was starting to expire. That night, my oldest daughter, just 9, curled up on the couch beside me and said something that hit me like a freight train. Mummy's friend doesn't smile much anymore. He doesn't talk to us either. He just watches TV. I asked her if he was mean. She shook her head. No, just bored, like he doesn't want to be there. And there it was. Jason hadn't signed up for a family. He'd signed up for Diane's highlight reel, the version of her that wanted to escape real life. But once the dust settled, he got the full picture. 2 kids, bills, dentist appointments, sleepless nights. And he didn't want it. A week later, I found out from Diane's own mother that Jason had taken a break and was staying with a buddy in Muskogee. Translation, he bailed. And suddenly, Diane was scrambling, calling more often, asking if we could talk like adults about the house, about support, about what's fair. She never admitted the fantasy had collapsed, but she didn't have to. Her voice said it all. The sadness, the panic, the slow realization that she'd traded something solid for something that couldn't even stand up to pressure. I didn't throw it in her face. I didn't say I told you so. That wasn't my job anymore. What surprised me, though, was how little satisfaction I felt. I thought I'd enjoy seeing her regret it, watching it all fall apart. But all I felt was sadness. Not for her, exactly, but for the brokenness she'd brought into our girls' lives. For the way she let something temporary tear through something permanent. For the fact that the only person Jason ever wanted to take care of was Jason. And that's when I realized something else. Something big. She was never trying to build a life with Jason. She was trying to escape hers. But life doesn't disappear when you walk away from it. It waits for you. The bills, the guilt, the responsibility. They all wait. And when the fantasy ends, all that's left is what you tried to leave behind. Only now, it's heavier. Meanwhile, I was growing stronger. I was spending real time with my kids, picking up hobbies I'd let go of, hitting the gym before work, getting right in the places I didn't even know were broken. Because when the storm hit, I stayed. I held the line. I kept showing up. And there's power in that. The man she ran to, he ran away. But I was still standing. And whether Diane ever truly saw the difference that was on her. Because the truth was starting to settle in. The grass wasn't greener, it was astroturf. And even that was fading. They say kids are resilient, and it's true, to a point. But what people don't talk about enough is how aware they are. How much they pick up on, even when you think you're shielding them from the mess. Diane always believed the girls were too young to understand what was happening. She thought that if she smiled enough, kept the fridge stocked with snacks, and introduced Jason as just Mummy's friend, everything would stay neat and controlled. But kids aren't stupid. They see it all. It started with little comments. Nothing that would raise alarm on its own, but over time, they painted a picture. One evening, while I was helping my youngest, Abby, with her spelling homework, she said, "Mom's friend Jason got mad 'cause the TV was too loud." I asked her what she meant, and she shrugged. He told us to be quiet, and then left the room. Mommy told us not to bother him when he's tired. A few days later, my oldest, Ellie, who's almost 10 and has her mother's memory but my temperament, told me Jason bought her a birthday present. "But we're not supposed to tell you," she whispered. "Mom said it might make you sad." I looked at her for a second, trying not to show anything on my face. But inside, something twisted. Because what Diane didn't understand, or maybe refused to understand, was that secrecy doesn't protect kids. It confuses them. It teaches them to question what they're allowed to feel, to hide their excitement or sadness depending on who's in the room, and that kind of emotional acrobatics. That's not childhood. That's survival. I never asked them direct questions about their mom's new life. I didn't want to be that parent, the one fishing for dirt through his kids. But they'd offer pieces on their own, like breadcrumbs falling from small hands. I just had to listen. One Friday evening, after I picked them up, we stopped for burgers and milkshakes at the old diner on Route 51. We were halfway through dinner when Ellie put down her fork, looked up, and asked, "Dad, do you miss Mummy?" I didn't expect it. Not like that. Her voice was soft, but serious, not the way a child usually talks about their parents' separation. I answered honestly. I miss the way things used to be. I miss how we were when we were happy. She nodded slowly, then said something that still echoes in my head. I think Mummy misses it too, but she acts like she doesn't. And right there, in the middle of sticky tabletops and neon signs buzzing overhead, my daughter had just summed up what took me months to understand. Diane wasn't just trying to move on. She was pretending to have already moved on, even to the people closest to her, especially to the kids. But the performance was cracking. Later that night, when I tucked Abby into bed, she clung to me tighter than usual. "I don't like it when Mummy's friend stays over," she mumbled into my chest. "He never plays with us. He just stares at his phone." That one hit hard. Not just because of what it said about Jason, but because of what it meant for Diane. She had invited a man into their lives who didn't even see them, didn't engage, didn't show up, didn't try. And in doing so, she was teaching our daughters that this is what love and companionship looked like now. Indifference, disconnection, silence. The thing is, when you're a parent, you don't just model relationships, you model self. And whether Diane meant to or not, she was showing our girls that a man could ignore them and still be welcome in their home. That he didn't have to love them, didn't have to care, to be accepted. And I couldn't let that stand, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to speak poorly about their mom, no matter how much I wanted to some days. But I was going to show them something different. I was going to be the kind of man who listens when they talk, who shows up every time, who laughs loudly and hugs tightly, and remembers their favorite ice cream flavors, who doesn't just share space with them, but shares attention, affection, presence. Because kids don't need explanations. They don't need family court breakdowns or adult justifications. They need consistency. They need love. And more than anything, they need to see what good looks like. In time, Diane started noticing it too. Not from me, but from the girls. They started calling more when they were with her, asking to stay with me longer, wanting me to come to school events, even on her weeks. And I could tell it stung. She didn't say it outright, but her voice grew clipped. She started trying harder. Sudden spa days, new clothes, little bribes. But kids don't fall for shiny things for long. They want presence, warmth, safety. And whether she could admit it or not, she was losing that battle. The irony is, for all her effort to keep the kids from knowing too much, they had already figured out the truth on their own. That something had shifted. That their world had cracked. That Daddy stayed steady while Mummy spun in circles. I didn't need to explain that to them. They already knew. And as painful as it was to watch, it also gave me hope. Because if they could see the difference, then maybe, just maybe, they'd grow up learning how to recognize it in others too. How to choose what's real over what just looks good for a little while. And that hope, that's what I held on to, even as everything else fell apart. By the end of summer, you could feel it in the air, not just the slow shift of the seasons, but something heavier. The shine was wearing off. The story Diane had convinced herself of, the one where she ran off into some carefree new life with Jason, was beginning to crumble, and she couldn't stop it. No matter how many smiles she forced, or how many new outfits she wore trying to prove she was thriving. It was subtle at first. She started texting more often, but never about the girls. It was always logistical, nonsense questions about insurance, tax forms, a reminder that she still had mail coming to the house. I knew what it really was. Excuses to stay on my radar. Each message was like a small ripple, testing the water to see if I'd still respond. I always did. Brief, polite, no emotion. Then came the cosmetic changes. She dyed her hair twice. In 1 month. Started wearing lipstick again. Got a nose piercing she never would have considered when we were married. She posted photos of herself with fake captions like, "Doing me for the first time in years." But her eyes said something else. Empty. Tired. Her wardrobe shifted to fewer cozy sweaters, more crop tops and tight jeans. Like she was trying to become someone new. Someone Jason would want longer. But no matter how you repaint a house, the foundation doesn't change. And Diane's was cracking. The kids were noticing too. They'd come home talking about how Mummy cries in the bathroom a lot, or how Jason sleeps on the couch now. One night, Ellie told me, Mom says she's just stressed, but she gets mad really fast, even when we didn't do anything. It was only a matter of time. Jason, from what I gathered, had started pulling away. He'd lost his job again, some warehouse gig that didn't last more than 6 weeks. He'd bounce between her place and his aunt's whenever they argued, which, from what the girls let slip, was often. Diane tried to keep up appearances, telling people they were working through some things. But the glow was gone. The fantasy was running on fumes. One Saturday, I met Diane at the park to drop off the girls. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. Her lip was swollen, subtly but unmistakably. I didn't say a word. Neither did she, but we both knew what it meant. She tried to act normal, asking about school supplies, talking about Halloween costumes, but her voice trembled when she said goodbye. When I buckled the girls into my truck, I caught her in the rearview mirror, wiping her eyes, still trying to hold the mask up. That evening, she called me, just after the girls went to bed. I nearly didn't pick up, but something told me I should. Her voice was quiet, almost childlike. Do you think I made a mistake? I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't know if she could handle hearing it. I said, that's something you'll have to figure out yourself. Diane. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just said, okay, and hung up. It's a strange thing, watching someone unravel, especially someone you once loved, someone you built a life with. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't celebrate. I just felt tired, because I had spent months putting myself back together, piece by piece, while she was out there chasing something that never really existed. And now she was beginning to understand. There was no paradise waiting on the other side of betrayal, just chaos, consequences, and a man-child who couldn't carry the weight of a real life. She thought leaving would set her free. That maybe love with Jason would feel like youth again, easy, electric, full of second chances. But it turns out, there's no shortcut through growth. You either face yourself, or you run in circles. And Diane had been sprinting in place for months. Meanwhile, I was standing still, and moving forward at the same time. I had my girls. I had my peace. I had a new understanding of who I was, and what I deserved. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. I was steady, and the difference between us couldn't have been clearer. What Diane didn't understand until it was too late is that fantasy only works when no one's watching. But once real life enters the frame, bills, children, silence between fights, it collapses. Every time I fall, the calls stopped, so did the texts. And I didn't chase them, because what she broke, what we lost, wasn't something I was ever going to rebuild. Not for her, not again. The collapse of her dream didn't bring me joy. It brought me clarity, and in that clarity, I found something far better than revenge. I found freedom. The shift didn't happen overnight. There wasn't some big cinematic moment where everything clicked and I stood taller. No dramatic confrontation, no lightning bolt of confidence. It was slower than that, quieter, but deeper. Like a tide, changing direction, steady and unstoppable. At first, I didn't even realize it was happening. But looking back now, it was the most important change of all. It started with the little things. I stopped answering Diane's late-night texts. Stopped letting her moods pull me into conversations that went nowhere. When she called asking for favors that had nothing to do with the kids running errands, fixing things at the house, listening to her vent about Jason, I started saying no, not rudely, just firmly, calmly, without apology. That's when I realized the power was shifting. See, for months after the separation, I was reacting, always one step behind, always trying to make sense of her choices, always wondering what had gone wrong. I was the one hurting. She was the one in control, or at least that's how it felt. But as time passed, the roles reversed. Not because I played some game, or tried to win, but because I chose something she never did: growth. While she chased validation, I chased peace. I got into therapy, started exercising again. Nothing extreme, just morning walks that turned into runs, weight sessions that helped me sleep at night. I began cooking my own meals, not just microwaving frozen dinners. I started journaling, praying more, showing up for myself in ways I hadn't done in years. I even dusted off my old guitar and found a little joy in the strumming again. It didn't fix everything, but it made me feel alive again. And Diane, she noticed. The first time I saw it was during a custody exchange. I'd had the girls for the weekend, and we met at the usual spot, the church parking lot near downtown. I stepped out of my truck wearing a button-down and clean jeans, my beard trimmed, energy light. Diane pulled up in her car, looking tired and unwashed, and I saw that flicker in her eyes. Confusion, maybe even regret. She tried to make small talk. Asked about my weekend. When I said we'd gone apple picking just outside Bartlesville and had a blast, she hesitated, then smiled. Too wide. Oh, that's cute. I smiled back, neutral. Yeah, it was. Then I turned to the girls, helped them with their backpacks, kissed them both, and got in my truck. I didn't linger. I didn't ask about her weekend. I didn't try to read between the lines. That small, silent boundary, it shook her. Over the next few weeks, she began calling more frequently, not to argue, not even to coordinate, just to talk. At first, it was under the guise of kid-related updates, but it always turned personal. She started fishing, asking if I was seeing anyone, if I still hated her, if I ever thought we'd been too young to get married. All the things people say when they're circling regret but can't admit they're drowning in it. I kept my answers short, respectful, focused on the girls, and the more I didn't give her what she was looking for, the more unsettled she became. Control, you see, isn't always loud. It's subtle. It lives in the spaces where someone used to be able to push your buttons and suddenly can't. And Diane could feel that shift. I was no longer the man she left. I was stronger now. Not bitter, not vengeful, just free. The shift wasn't just about emotion, either. Legally, I took back control. I hired a better attorney, got the custody arrangement formalized and written in stone. Child support, fair and exact. No extra handouts. Property division, precise. I wasn't petty. I was prepared. And when Diane realized I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore, she panicked. She started saying things like, "I thought we could do this amicably," or, "You've changed." I didn't take the bait. I just said, "This is what healthy boundaries look like." That was when she really started to unravel. Jason had disappeared again. Probably back with his aunt or whoever was willing to give him a couch. Diane was juggling 2 kids, a part-time job, overdue bills, and the weight of choices she couldn't take back. I watched as the fantasy she'd traded our life for completely collapsed, and now, there was no one left to blame but herself, and me. Was good, really good. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hoping she'd hurt or fall apart. I wasn't checking her social media or asking mutual friends for updates. I had detached. Not because I didn't care, but because caring was no longer my responsibility. She made her choice. The power shift wasn't about dominance. It was about dignity. It was about showing my daughters what self-respect looks like. About refusing to let someone else's chaos drag me down. About reclaiming a life I thought I'd lost, only to find it had been waiting for me all along. And I'll tell you something I didn't expect. Peace is louder than anger. Confidence speaks without raising its voice. And once you find your footing again, no one, not even the person who broke you, can knock you off balance. That was the shift. That was the moment. I knew I was done being the man who'd been left behind, because now, I was the one moving forward, and Diane, she was just watching me disappear into a life she could have had, but never valued. And that was her choice, not mine. It's strange. The moment you realize there's no going back, not because you can't, but because you simply don't want to anymore. That moment doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic music. It's quiet. A calm settling over everything that used to hurt. It's when the anger fades, the pain dulls, and all that's left is clarity. For me, that moment came on a cool November afternoon. I was sitting in the backyard, raking leaves while the girls played under the old oak tree. The one Diane and I planted the year we bought the house. The air smelled like wood smoke and wet soil, and for the first time in a long time, I felt steady, not waiting for the next blow, not replaying old conversations in my head, not wondering what could have been, just present. That's when I knew I didn't miss her anymore. Not the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of her, the woman I married, the life we once had, but the real Diane, the one who walked away and never looked back until it all fell apart. That version was a stranger to me now, and I had no desire to bring her back into the life I had rebuilt. She reached out a few more times, always carefully, like she didn't want to spook me. A text on Thanksgiving. "Hope you and the girls have a nice day." A voicemail the week before Christmas. "Let me know if you'd be okay doing gifts together this year." "For old time's sake," I responded. Politely, never cold, but always distant. And she got the message. She tried once, just once, to talk about reconciliation. She didn't say it directly, but it was there in the silence between her words. In the way she asked if I was really happy, and how she brought up old memories. Like the night we camped out in the living room after the tornado sirens, holding flashlights and laughing until the power came back on. I let her talk. I smiled when it felt right. But when she finally said, "Do you ever think we could, I don't know, find our way back?" I answered without hesitation, "No, I don't." She didn't cry. She just nodded, eyes downcast, and said, "Yeah, I figured." And that was it. No more questions. No more maybes. Just a long silence that didn't need to be filled. There's a kind of peace that comes with finality. When you've given someone every chance, forgiven what you could, processed what you couldn't, and still choose to walk away, that's when healing becomes real. That's when you stop surviving and start living. Because here's the truth. No one likes to say out loud, not all stories need a redemption arc. Some people don't come back changed. Some bridges stay burned. And sometimes, the happy ending isn't a reunion, it's freedom. I found myself again in the quiet moments. Packing school lunches, reading on the porch, watching my daughters grow into resilient, kind, bright young women who saw their father stand tall when life tried to knock him flat. That was my redemption. Not getting the girl back. Not proving her wrong, but proving to myself that I was more than what happened to me now. When I look in the mirror, I see a man who's been through hell and didn't let it define him. I still believe in love, still believe in loyalty, in second chances. But not at the cost of self-respect, not at the cost of my peace, and certainly not for someone who only missed me when the fantasy wore off. There's no bitterness in that. Just truth. The man I was before Diane left. He would have taken her back in a heartbeat. He would have tried to fix it, to shoulder the blame, to carry the weight alone. But that man's gone. And the man who took his place, he knows there's no turning back. And for the first time in a long time, that's more than okay. It's liberating.